You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
Now, I spoke about this on the show on Monday with Randy Hillier, who's an independent MPP, or the equivalent of an MLA in Ontario. And what happened in the response to that interview was very great. I got emails from all sorts of people saying thank you for having him on, people that have become big fans of Randy Hillier for being, in many cases, the one-man opposition to the politics of lockdown, which are not limited to one particular ideological group. And now you have the special interest groups that are getting in on this, pushing governments to shut things down. In particular, the Ontario Hospital Association has pushed a letter to the Ontario government, and I'll tell you why this matters to people outside of Ontario in a moment. But the Ontario Hospital Association pushed a letter saying there should be immediate restrictions and shutdowns on non-essential businesses such as gyms, dine-in restaurants and bars, nightclubs, theaters, and restrictions on places like churches, synagogues, mosques, etc. So now you've got a bunch of healthcare activists that are saying we need to shut down churches, shut down restaurants, shut down all of these things. Basically go back to, I don't know if it was stage 1 or stage 2, but go back to one of the early stages of the initial lockdown and ban people from getting together. So this is so ridiculous. And the narrative right now being pushed is that because we see cases going up, we've got to shut everything down. Even though hospitalizations are not going up, deaths are not going up, the cases that we are seeing, and I mean, you can't take for granted that case counts are an accurate measure, as we've talked about, but the cases that we are seeing are by and large from younger people, a lot of house parties, some bars and nightclubs, but it's behavioral, it's not locational. And this is the one thing that people need to realize. These transmissions that we are seeing come down to how people choose to behave, not the opportunity that's presented to them by the government or by any sort of business. I mean, the latest change in Ontario was shut down bars at midnight. They have to do last call at 11 p.m. And I heard this, and I'm like, well, this is ridiculous, because I live in a student town. I live in a town where lots of people are at a university and a college, so we've got a very vibrant nightlife scene. And I know that what happens already when the bars shut down at, is it 2 a.m. they shut down at? This is how little I've connected to that world in my life. I think it's 2 a.m. Everyone goes to a house party and drinks from, 2 to 4. So now the bars are shutting down at midnight. Everyone's going to go to a house party and drink from midnight to 4, and it's not really going to make a huge difference at all. So this is where we're going. It's theatrical. It is theatrical in nature. When we see the Hospital Association calling for shutdown of restaurants, I'm not aware of a single outbreak from a restaurant, from someone dining in a restaurant. I'm not aware of any. In fact, most of the people that are going to restaurants are the same bubbles as one another. My wife and I have gone out to restaurants. The server's wearing a mask. We sit down, we eat, we leave. There's no risk to that. We're not having big 20-person parties there. And if we were, we'd probably be the type of people that were going to have a 20-person party in a home instead of in a restaurant. But churches? There have been, I can count on one hand the number of cases there have been linked to churches, and those are anomalies in the sense that you could find cases linked to any marginally close contact activity. But to say that shutting down churches is the way to go, we've been down this road. And there was an outcry, as there should have been, from people saying, hey, you're actually violating our civil liberties when you talk about shutting down places of worship because they're non-essential. And I was getting into a scrap with someone on Twitter about this the other day. I try to avoid scrapping on Twitter, but it sucked me in. Because people who aren't of faith, people who don't have a religion, they don't understand. They think that going to church is just like some silly thing that people do as a hobby on the weekend. They don't realize that it's actually something that Christians are called to do by God, and people in other faith groups as well. I won't speak for them, but they are called to do this. They are commanded to do it. They have to do it. And that's not to say you can't adjust or amend the way you do it. Some churches were doing online services, parking lot services, drive-in style. I get it. And some churches have just modified the distance to go in and sit down in the pews and worship like you normally would. And the fact that this happens safely, without issue, means that there is no license or justification to going back and saying we are going to shut down places of worship. And it shows a profound disrespect that so many of the same people who thought that 10,000 person Black Lives Matter rallies were okay are saying that, oh, you know what, you got to shut down your church. That's not essential. I'm sorry, if 10,000 people can get together and take a knee against police brutality or whatever they were protesting, it changes each week. If 10,000 people can do that, then 100 people can go into a church, a couple hundred people can go into a church, keep their distance, and that is not harming or threatening anyone. But it's the disrespect that we see from so many people on the lockdown left towards faith groups. And it's not like it's a conspiracy of, they've been looking for an excuse to shut down churches and now they've got one. But it shows a profound disrespect for the importance of faith in people's lives. And we do see that manifest in other ways. We do see it manifest whenever policy issues come up that are remotely related to morality or questions of ethics or morals. But when we're seeing it in this context, the fact is they just think, oh, it's just like a bar. The fact that they're lumping churches in with bars as being, oh, it's not essential, no one needs to do that, pretty much says what we need to know. So governments need to push back against this. The reason I'm talking about the Ontario case is because that's where we're seeing, I think, the most pivotal and critical discussion, in that we have a conservative government that's saying everything's on the table, threatening lockdown. And I'll say, I ran as a candidate. I could have been, I didn't come close, but I could have been theoretically a member of provincial parliament in this government. And I'm glad I didn't have to be. I have a lot more fun doing what I'm doing now than I would have if I were stuck in politics. That's not a reflection of any particular party. But I share that to say that there are a lot of conservatives that I'm hearing from that are thinking, okay, I don't exactly like that we have taken now this approach to government that has very much targeted businesses who are not the sources of the problems. And all of the lockdowns that we see tend to be theatrical. We flattened the curve. The curve is a straight line. That was the whole thing. It was never about preventing everyone from getting it. And I know I've repeated this, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. It was never about 0 cases, 0 transmission, 0 outbreaks. It was about not overwhelming the hospital system. Hospitals are sitting empty. I don't know how many cities have done this, but I know some have built entirely separate hospitals, field hospitals that have gone unused because there was no surge. And we can be grateful for that. I'm not unhappy there was no surge. I'm actually quite glad that we didn't have this overwhelming of ICUs. But the whole point of it was that we want to be able to manage the cases. There was an understanding that everyone was going to get it. You wanted to protect the vulnerable. And I am fully prepared. I'm not one of these pandemic truthers or plandemic, scandemic type people that thinks it's not real. It is. And I know that all these people in the YouTube comment sections hate that. Tough luck. I think it's real. I think we need to protect the vulnerable. But that's where the focus needs to be. Protecting the elderly in long-term care homes, that's important. Preventing people who want to go from church, who are willing to keep their distance when they go to church, from doing that because it's not essential, that is not okay. And the measured response that Canadians deserve is not happening. And we see it in provincial governments that are feeling completely justified and emboldened in lockdowns. And we see it in federal government now that the NDP and the Liberals think this is licensed to spend every dime and every dollar of taxpayer money they've ever wanted to spend. Give me a break. If you enjoy the show and want to hear more of it, we need your support. Head on over to andrewlawtonshow.com and click donate to support the work that we're doing and stand up for independent media.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.